Hello and welcome to the Gersnet Podcast, the independent Rangers podcast made for fans, by fans, and where the content is absolutely free. You're joining us tonight on our flagship show. It's an international break, but not to worry. You can sit back and relax and for the next hour as we recap Rangers' involvement in international football this week, as well as our players and the games of the season. We're going to go through a little recap tonight and look at some of the finest moments and finest players of our great season so far. Joining me, David Wren, your host tonight, for a glorious look back on the season so far before the return of the Scottish Cup next weekend, and then the post-split action thereafter. Ross, Bennett and Stewart Weir. Ross, I know you have your kilt on tonight, paid up member of the Tartan Army. You know, when you move away from Scotland, you then become super Scottish. So what are current events in Israel? Still one each?
Still one each. About just less than 2 minutes to go in added time. One each written all over it, I think. But fully paid up, I don't know if I'm a fully paid up member of the Tartan Army. I've never, other than a game at Wembley, I've never gone to an away game for Scotland. I've only been to about 2 or 3 home games. So fully paid up, no, I don't think so. Casual interested observer, probably more accurate. I've not got my kilt on, but I won't tip the laptop screen that low to show you what I have got on.
Thanks very much. I would actually agree with you. I don't mind. I quite like watching Scotland, like seeing them do well, but it doesn't affect my mood. You know, the way
exactly.
So if Rangers lose, I'm in a full mood for a long while, a good couple of days. Whereas Scotland lose, you sort of just go over it quite quickly.
Yeah.
But Stuart, you'd have been a happier man on Friday night. Scotland rugby team doing the business. I think you're muted there, Stuart.
No, I was told that's professionals work with professionals, never work with amateurs. It's a fantastic performance by Scotland on Friday night in Paris. I noticed all the headlines were saying, you know, party like it's 1999, which was the last time that Scotland had won there. But I corrected a few people by saying if you really wanted the party to go to, was one in 1995 when they hadn't won in Paris for 26 years. And you can imagine the sort of like 26 years of players who were there all wishing to partake in certain libations and various drinks and concoctions. In fact, I almost missed my flight, and I had never been to bed. That's how crazy it got. But no, it was fantastic, fantastic game. And of course, our Welsh friends and colleagues, they're over the moon because they've suddenly been given a title. Although that's us just repaying them back for 1999, and they beat England, of course, and gave us the Five Nations.
Yep, it's been a quiet week, Rangers wise, Ross. But international football wise, it's been a pretty successful week for our players. You know, Stephen Davis, who will come on to in a bit in more detail about what he's given us this season. But you know, becoming the joint highest capped British player alongside Peter Shilton, which fantastic effort. You know, 125 caps. Yanis Hadji getting his first Romania goal, lovely finish it was too. Leon Balogun, Joe Aribo involved for Nigeria. Glenn Kamara, you know, we saw the fantastic support his teammates gave him ahead of the game on Friday night, and Philip Hollander, who's playing at the moment for Sweden, and Borna Barisic, who was in a 1-0 victory last night. It's quite impressive just how many players we actually have performing, not only, you know, on the international stage, but especially when you look at Hollander and Barisic performing for pretty good sides.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a real marker as to where Rangers have been and how well we've done to come back from that. When you think 3 or 4 years ago, you'd look at when it was the international break, Rangers on the website would do their wee sort of international roundup, and it was about 40 words because we had maybe one player on international duty from the first team and then a couple of youngsters, and they'd have to kind of beef it up with like 16-year-old Ross McCrory was captain for the Scotland under-18s. But so now to be in a position, like you say, it's not like we're sending players, okay, we get 1 or 2 in the Scotland squad with Ryan Jack and John McLaughlin, Stephen Davis obviously for Northern Ireland, but top quality international sides. the starting fullback for Croatia, who will have a very, very, very strong World Cup next year, I'm sure. Sweden as well, Hollander doing well for them. Even, you go to Africa, Nigeria must be one of the more fancied sides in Africa at the moment. And, you and me, David, similar age, growing up with some excellent players from Nigeria to look back on. So happy to see them do well. It's just a really good marker of where Rangers is as a club now, that you're talking about 10 first team players going away on international duty, something like that. So we don't seem to have suffered any injuries because of it, which is always going to be the primary concern. We'll make sure that that's the case in a couple of days' time. Very pleased for Yanis to get his first goal for Romania, took that nicely, and that'll do a lot for his confidence, because we know he's a confidence player. Very, very encouraging international break.
Yeah, Stuart, Ross picked up on Yanis Hadji there. He had an interesting start to the season. He sort of struggled for form, was sort of bombed out of the team in a starting slot for a few months there, and then sort of came onto a game towards Christmas time. Beyond that, he's been great for us. So it's interesting now to see that come to fruition internationally, because he was obviously part of under 21 teams in the past. But to get his first goal, it shows just how good a season he's having.
Yeah, I mean, you say that about him in terms of how he started the season and how he came good. I mean, in general, most players play in fits and starts. You have maybe have a good start to the season and tail off a wee bit, or you have a good finish. It's very difficult, especially I would say nowadays, to play at a consistent level right through the entire season. If you look at Rangers, you could say different players have had spells where they have been key to the team and then maybe going off the boil a wee bit. I don't think there's anybody you can point to other than probably McGregor, but even Allan McGregor didn't play at the start of the season. He almost was gently eased in until such times as John McLaughlin had a slight off day, and then it was like, you're in and we're never, you're never leaving us again. So I think as far as that goes, I think Hadji has come good. The other thing you have to understand with the players is that their own self-esteem will grow given how they're doing domestically. There are some players who are born to be international players and will give you 7 and 8 out of 10 every time they pull on an international shirt. Then they come back to the club and you say, why can't you do it here, or why can't you do it there? Why do you never play for your country? I think, however, like somebody like Hadji, who's young and impressionable, I think you could see his confidence growing because he's part of something that he's never experienced before, which is a winning team and a successful team. And I think, if you listen to some of the things that are said and you speak to different people, what is coming through at Rangers this season is there's a whole bunch of guys who might have experienced things like this, or are more experienced players, the likes of Davis, the likes of McGregor. If you look at Gerrard and Gary McAllister, they will have experienced these kind of things as well. And I think what they're saying is lap it up, enjoy the moment, and use that as an energy to take propel yourself forward, either career-wise or in terms of your performances. And I think Rangers and the individuals in the team are in a really, really good place just now.
Yeah, and Ross, another thing I want to touch on about this weekend especially, and the season as a whole, and it's we're seeing it a lot more now that the Leagues 1 and 2 are back, but there's a lot of Rangers players, young guys out there that are performing for teams like Partick Thistle and Queen of the South, Wraith Rovers. There's a lot of boys out in loan that are doing some great things. Really, we spoke about this earlier, but a really, really nice clip from a couple of Partick Thistle fans on Twitter of their first goal yesterday, and it all came from a fantastic save from the young boy Kieran Wright, who's on loan from Rangers. But there's a lot of players out getting good game time for teams and actually decent football in sides like Partick Thistle and Wraith Rovers, and that can only be a positive thing for us moving forward too.
So in terms of that save from Wright, probably no one better to learn from in how to pull off a sort of physics-defying wonder save than Allan McGregor. He's done that so many times over the years, but I think
we've spoken on the show over the last couple of years about how the academy at Rangers hasn't really produced enough players, and as in players going on to make the first team. And we've sent a lot of players out on loan over the last few years, and none of them really have made an impact, with the exception of Patterson. And we'll wait and see what happens with Patterson, because over the last couple of years we've had McCrory and we've had Middleton, who have threatened to break through and then fell away a bit. So I've actually been quite critical of the academy at times on this show. But no, I mean, there are promising young players at Rangers, and I think sending them out, it's clearly a strategy from the management team, is send them out, get them men's football. Stephen Kelly, for example, getting really good write-ups at Ross County, and I know there's a lot of potential, a lot of promise there, and hope that he will be the next one to break through, because I think we have to hope that getting them first team football at appropriately levelled clubs is the best way to try and forge that pathway into the first team. We'll have to see, because we've been sending players out on loan for a number of years now. I've not really reaped the benefits of that. So it's better than keeping them at the Rangers training centre and playing under 19 games every week. I'd much rather see them out learning their trade. And absolutely wonderful save from right at Particus.
I also think, Ross, that there's an element of the fact that Rangers have loaned players out in the past, but it's almost as if teams have been looking for bodies, and Rangers have got plenty of bodies and will have one of theirs, and Rangers have been happy to let them go. Whereas I think now those that are actually looking to loan players from Rangers, it's almost like a two-way street. It's benefiting Rangers because the players getting out there and actually playing games, but it's also benefiting the clubs, because I would say the standard of player that's going out there is a better player than what they've maybe had to pick from or utilise in the past. So I think all in all that it's working for a number of clubs, and again, it's dependent on where Rangers want to send them. I know there's one or two clubs who have been a bit cheesed off that they haven't managed to secure loan deals from Rangers, but I think Rangers have looked at it and said that's not the kind of football we want our guys to be playing, and therefore they'll only go to clubs. I'm not saying that they're a mirror image of how Rangers play the game, but there are certain principles that the other teams play to that's the Rangers coaching staff, the Rangers management are quite happy to let these guys go and play in that environment rather than some teams that you see.
I think that's a really good point, and that's probably, I know they've had a bit of a shake-up in the roles that the senior staff are playing at the academy, and I think that will probably be Billy Kirkwood that does that role, kind of the development of those players as they go out on loan. But if I was a 17, 18, 19-year-old, I'm not far off, but if I was at the academy as a player and I'm at that stage in my career, I would be looking at this and thinking the chances of me actually breaking into the Rangers first team in the next couple of years are fairly slim, because look at the calibre of players that we've got. I mean, we've just spoken about the number that are out on international duty. We're a top-class European side, and it's not easy to break into that. So if I was a young player, I would want to go on loan. I would want to go to the highest level that I can, whether that be playing at Ross County in the top tier in Scotland and being a starting player there who's doing very well. But I always like seeing the players that choose to go down to England. And if you look at, Glenn Middleton went to Bradford, Greg Docherty went to Shrewsbury, I think, went on loan to Shrewsbury last year. And it's not worked out for him at Rangers. But being down there on loan, that's given him the exposure to be picked up by Hull, and he's now a starting, very, very important player at Hull. So it benefits everyone. It benefits us as the loaning club. It benefits the loanee club, and it benefits the player as well, because if they're not going to make it with us, at least they've got the exposure to kick on and try and get a permanent move somewhere.
It's funny you say that, not to hog this these couple of minutes, but looking at old Rangers photographs and looking at teams from the likes of the 1960s into the 70s, even into the 80s, and going through the squads where there were guys at Ibrox for that period of time who were constantly and permanently reserves. They did nothing else than play for the reserves, and you go right through names, and you see names here, and how it continues for about 8, 9, 10 seasons, and then all of a sudden they disappear and might go to Falkirk. But primarily Rangers held on to players and used them as backup. Although they weren't backup, you didn't have the same squad rotation and all the rest of it. So as a result, there were guys almost ready for having testimonials based on just being at Ibrox and good attendance rather than good performances. And I think that whole thing is something that has changed markedly over the last 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, we're speaking about stars of the future there, but kind of next segment I want to go into is stars of the present, and this has been something that's been spoken about quite a lot. I think maybe in a Scotland sense in terms of the entire country in the league, but it's quite difficult this season because I can't remember a season where there were so many candidates for Player of the Year, and we pretty much are going to hog all the nominations, I think. So I'm not sure how this is going to work, but I thought we would go through the main candidates and we'll discuss their merits and whether they are the ones. But it could just turn into everyone should get it.
You want us to do the nominations job for the Football Writers and the Players Player of the Year award.
Exactly. But no, it's quite difficult because we're looking at now. I'll list the players in order of how I think they might be if I was doing bookies odds now, and then after we've discussed them, we'll go on to maybe people that have got an outside chance, or honourable mentions for others that have performed really well. So for me, I think the favourite is still James Tavernier, even though he's been out injured. I think I'd be pretty surprised if he didn't get the nod in a national sense. I think if PFA awards, I would back him. But if we're looking at solely Rangers awards, I would say James Tavernier. I would actually say second for me, just going in popular opinion, probably Allan McGregor. Third, Stephen Davis. Close third, actually. Connor Goldson and Ryan Kent would be the 5, I would say. Now, feel free to disagree with me, but we'll go through them first, and then we can all take our own pick. And whether we agree or not doesn't matter. But we'll go through the nominees. Now, James Tavernier, Ross, I'm sure you've got the stats to hand, because I don't. But no, I mean, Tav's a player for me. I look at him as someone. Who just sums up the sort of journey from 2015 to now. I think he's been there with us through all the highs and lows and many lows that have been there, and he's turned in performances this season that have almost summed up his time here as well, because he has been unbelievable going forward, but he's also very, very few, but there's been a couple of occasions where there's been defensive lapses as well. But I think the attacking play, and actually, to be fair to him, his defensive play is really improved as a solid unit in the team, as part of a solid unit, sorry. So he would be the front runner, but let's just have we'll quickly discuss him, his performances this season.
I think he started the season incredibly strongly, and it set the tone for what was going to come for Rangers. I mean, you say you want stats. I've just Googled SPL stats. I can tell you that he scored 0.38 goals every 90 minutes, 25% goal conversion, 50% shot accuracy. Sounds very good. I think we know that Tavernier is going to rack up stats in terms of numbers of goals and assists because of the role. Firstly, he takes the penalties. But secondly, the role that he plays as the modern 21st century fullback, is he top of the assist chart? He is, right? 9 assists in 29 games, joint top of the assist chart with Yanis Hadji. So he's going to get good numbers because of the role that he plays, and that's fine. But you can see the difference in Tavernier this season. Now, firstly, the criticism about him was always the defensive lapses. I'm struggling to think of any defensive lapses this season. Certainly can't think of any that have really cost us in any game. And I don't think you can level the criticism of that guy cannot defend at a defender and the captain of a club that's conceded, 2 goals at home all season, 8 or 9 goals in total in the league or something. So that to me has, I think he was always a little bit of a confidence player defensively. and he's got confidence now. And he's been injured for 4 or 5 weeks, and that's a shame, because he said it himself in his interview after we sealed 55. The word to use was roller coaster to describe his time at Rangers, and it's absolutely true. I mean, the highest of highs at Rangers, from winning 55 to getting through, beating Celtic in the Scottish Cup semi-finals 3 or 4 years ago, but then some very, very low times as well. Motherwell playoff. No, sorry, he wasn't here for the Motherwell playoff. What am I talking about? But we've had some shocking performances, and Celtic in the League Cup finalists last year, getting hosed off them 5-0, 5-1. He's been through really difficult stuff at Ibrox, and had quite publicly people questioning whether he's up for it and whether he's good enough. He quite plainly is good enough, and I think this season he's shown the value that he has. It's a shame for him, because you look back at his career stats, you look at his Wikipedia page, and it's one of those where the box on the right-hand side of his history of clubs is just loan after loan after loan, moved around all over the place, and he never really settled. Well, it's taken him a while, but he settled at Rangers, and he's got his family up in Scotland. He's been there a good 6 seasons now. So he's settled, he's found his place, he's found a club that he'll probably ride out the next 2 or 3 years before moving back down south to retire, I'd have thought. And he's, I think, quite magnificently led the club this season. Shame that he's been injured for the time that we clinch it, but he'll no doubt be back on the pitch for the Aberdeen team when we lift the trophy, and no one else deserves it more.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really harsh that you're trying to blame him for the Motherwell playoff defeat, as well as everything else. But bit of selective history there. But he has been fantastic. Now I'm going to try and we'll go through these one by one, because I don't want to spend too much time on one person. But okay. Stewart,
Can I mention Tavernier?
We'll go.
I'll do it very quickly. Very quickly. I'll say 2 things. One, I think because of his longevity at Rangers, it's quite easy for people to pick up on what he did previously and point the finger and say you were at fault for these things. So if anything does happen, he is the fickle finger of fate points at him again. And don't get me wrong, there are times where the criticism is deserved. What I do think, however, is that there's other members of the team suddenly realise what he gives to Rangers. And therefore, if he's bombing down the right and creating and taking chances, he cannot be defending as well. And I think where Rangers have smartened up, especially this season, is that if he goes down one side, and it equally applies to Barisic can down the other side, if they go down the sides, then everybody has to shuffle across one or come back inside. So effectively you play with maybe a 3 at the back, or sometimes even a 2 at the back, but you still have to defend the space. And I think Tavernier, that having somebody at his back has made him a far more comfortable and confident player because of that. Whereas before, he was trying to run the length of the pitch in one direction and then running all the way back again, and that's an impossibility.
Yep, agreed. The second player I mentioned, and Stuart, I want to ask you about this, because over the past few weeks, I think especially since that save in Prague, Allan McGregor has had some rave reviews, people saying he should be player of the season. Now, I think I've just been numbed to Allan McGregor, his brilliance over the years, because, his full sort of mantra is, that's what I'm there for, I'm there to make saves. And I think that's rubbed off in the fans, actually. I think the fans, certainly that's how I feel. I've never felt as comfortable with a goalkeeper in my life as I do with Allan McGregor in goal. I feel like when teams are clean through or shots are coming to the top bag, he's there to save them. And I don't think we've had many goalies, maybe Gorham, maybe Kloss at a push, but McGregor for me is just sublime, unbelievable. 39 years old, still pulling off saves that beggars belief, really. And you've covered Rangers and been at games, since the very start for him, which would have been 2006-07 under Paul Le Guen. So you'll know more than most, having probably met him, interviewed him. the kind of character he is, and I think that personality's rubbed off. I think he's more than deserving given his contribution. But you're maybe able to tell us a bit more about the man.
I don't think any written interview that Allan McGregor's given has ever appeared as it was given. I think there is quite a bit of editing goes on, simply because of, how can I put this best without incriminating him or myself? There are some phraseology that he uses that would leave a lot to be desired, and probably find you in a court of law if you ever used it in your newspaper. He actually undersells himself massively. You're almost right. It's almost like the Presbyterian ethos. That's what we're put on earth to do. You're put on here to work, not enjoy yourself. And he comes across like that in some of the press conferences, that's what I do. So what? And then they'll basically tell you why he made the save, not going into the mechanics of how he made the save, but why he had to make that save, because he wasn't doing his job, or this guy wasn't here, and all the rest of it. And I think he has certainly got better. I was asked a question, who do you think the best is? I still think it's probably maybe Gorham that edges it, simply because of his longevity right at the very top and what he had to do overcoming injuries and all the rest of it. But you have to say McGregor's been outstanding. Personally, for me, and I'm not going to follow out with anybody, but I'm right, McGregor should be the player of the year, because he has saved Rangers on occasions when, okay, they've had an outstanding season, but it might have been the difference between 3 points and only 1 point. And when it comes to that, you have to look at his overall contribution, and I think he's just been absolutely amazing. The three goalkeepers Klaus was a terrific goalkeeper, but the three goalkeepers I would always put up right at the very top that I have seen and I have witnessed at Rangers would be, in reverse order, or not in reverse order, but in sort of chronological order going back the way, would be currently McGregor, before him Gorham, and before that Chris Woods. I think sometimes Chris Woods is overlooked simply because he made it look so absolutely easy, positional wise, and even the saves he made. And there was somebody, and a couple of weeks ago when he made that save against or in Prague, it was like, isn't that the greatest save ever made? I still think the one he made against Werder Bremen, was it Sanogo? He made the save from and put it on at the crossbar. That is an absolute wonder save. That is the kind of save you make once in a lifetime for normal goalkeepers. McGregor's actually making probably one of them a season in his time at Rangers, and just amazing. And you can see why, if he gets an extra year deal or a 2-year deal, what a signing he was to come back to Rangers. But it also shows you what Steven Gerrard must have seen, or somebody has told Steven Gerrard, and Steven Gerrard has looked at it. And I think you only get he's placed his trust in McGregor, and Allan McGregor hasn't let him down.
Ross, Stewart mentioned, Allan McGregor coming back to Rangers and the impact he's made. Stephen Davis, what can be said about Stephen Davis that hasn't already been said, especially this second half of the season? He has been magnificent.
Yeah, he has. We said it last time we were on as well, that a bit of a slow start when he came back up the roads, but has proved everyone wrong and fully deserves more time, because he's been absolutely class. He really has this season. He's been excellent, still full of drive, full of energy, a very smart, intelligent player. He seems like a thoroughly nice guy as well. He's been doing a fair bit of media through, talking about the equaling the British Cats record. Just seems like a nice guy, and I think he's probably also a very good presence to have for the younger players around the dressing room. I mean, he certainly knows what it means to play for the club. He knows what it means to win titles for the club, and I think it was a very sort of shrewd move by Gerrard and his management team, bringing McGregor and Davis back in. because we didn't really have any winners in the squad. You think back to the team that we had maybe under Warburton with your Martin Waghorns and your Joe Garners and decent enough players, but none of them were really winners. So Gerrard brings in people who don't just know how to win the league, know how to win the league with Rangers. And Davis, I think all season he's been superb. And I think with sort of modern sports science that we have today, we don't need to necessarily worry about these guys ticking into their mid to late 30s in the same way that maybe we would have done 10 or 15 years ago. I can't think of when Stephen Davis last had a significant injury that put him out for more than 3 weeks. The guy just seems to be immune to that. So he's been excellent. I would love to see him score a few more goals. That's not to say I'm criticising him for not scoring enough goals. I love to see him score goals, and I love to see the guy happy. So he's had a wonderful season. He really has.
It's interesting. You've still not nailed your colours to the mast here, but I'm going to nail my colours to the mast because I know Stewart said Allan McGregor. For me, Connor Goldson has been magnificent this season. I think he, and it's probably one of those that is against popular opinion, but I just can't see past him. I think he has been utterly dominant for us, and I think he and McGregor, but I think Goldson and his organisation of that defence, every game this season he's played, we've conceded 9 goals in the league. For me, and I actually think he just looks like a player who is at the top of his game. Physically, he's an absolute unit. He's massive. He looks like a rugby player, and his passing, his ability to play out from the back, his pace, his leadership qualities, which we've seen come to the fore massively in the past couple of weeks. I can't see past Goldson. I sort of made up my mind in January. I just thought he'd been brilliant. I thought he leads by example every game. And Stewart, I know you've said McGregor, but I mean a word for Goldson because he has been truly just a warrior this season.
Yeah, the word I would use would be probably awesome. Organisational wise, I think people sometimes, Craig Brown had a famous saying, his head is like a magnet when it comes to getting the ball, and you would have to say that about Goldson sometimes. How many times have you seen balls get in and you think to yourself, that's either going to end up in the net or somebody's going to get a knockdown, and all of a sudden he comes in and makes the block or makes the challenge. He's the top of his game. I'll tell you the interesting thing for me here is that, David, you've gone for Goldson, I've gone for McGregor, and Ross is sort of opted slightly in the favour of Tavernier. And I don't think of the three of us, and I would say if it's the three of us, then you could actually cast your net a bit wider. I don't think anybody would suddenly be pointing their finger and saying, you don't know what you're talking about, or you haven't got it right, if any of those three guys was to win the Player of the Year award in any competition or in any category. That's how good they've been for Rangers, and that's how good they've been for their teammates as well. I think Goldson has been immense. I was trying to piece it together the other day and think to myself, all the Rangers teams, the winning Rangers teams, they always had somebody, whether it was Goff or whether it was Amoruso. Okay, there was guys that played beside them, but they were big, dominant characters who were winners and who you would rely on to be a winner, either in their own penalty box or the opposition penalty box. And I think Goldson has grown into that for a guy, and also again for a guy that's come through what he has come through, just to make it as a footballer and give his all the way he does, I think is a remarkable story.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, I just googled it again to make sure I got the details right, but February 2017, Connor Goldson had life-saving open heart surgery after a screening when he was at Brighton, found that he had an enlarged aorta. I mean, we've seen it on the pitch, but that guy is full of heart.
Yeah.
If Alec Anderson made it, he would be on the floor laughing. Right? I've been working on that all day.
No, he'd be on the floor laughing at his own joke if he played that. True. Anyway, no, but I think you're absolutely right on that one. I think the guy. Sometimes in life, you have moments that changes you and changes your mindset. And you just wonder if that was such a moment for Connor Goldson, because in effect he could have gone one of two ways. Either I could have curled up into a ball and said, football's not for me, I'm enjoying life as it is, or you go the opposite way and you pitch your entire life and soul into being a footballer. And he has done that. And again, going back to the whole thing about who Rangers were signing, I came across something I'd written about Philippe Senderos. I mean, God Almighty! It's like I still think I've got a book in me. The embarrassed jersey, 100 leg ends hyphenated of Rangers, because in the last maybe 20 years we'd probably managed to actually come up with 100 names where you say, how did he ever get a game? But in terms of of Connor Goldson and what he has done, whoever scouted him, or whoever knew about him, or whoever identified him and said, that is a guy you can build your team around, which in effect you do with your centre-back, deserves a gold watch, because he has been an immense signing, especially when you see the catastrophic disasters maybe about 3 miles across the city.
Yeah, we've still got a couple to go through in this Player of the Year thing, but
we've sorted it.
I just want to apologise. Quickly to the listeners for Ross's sense of humour. Ross's sense of humour with that full of heart joke. It doesn't represent Gersnet as a brand. That was his own personal opinion of what is funny. So, but yeah, do you know what? I think we're getting to the stage now where we are they're the top four, I think, and I think they're the only four. But Ross, honourable mentions for me would have to go to Ryan Kent, who I think has been magnificent. I just love, he's the sort of player for me you would pay money to go and watch every single week, and I think we all do. But this season he's been fantastic, and I just think every game he never shies away from the ball. Others, I think Glenn Kamara has been magnificent. I think he's been great alongside Stephen Davis. Barisic again, very rarely had a bad game this season. I think defensively has been magnificent actually, and it's not something you would normally associate with him. And then Alfredo, who has to get an honourable mention, because he gives his heart and soul to this club all times, and he's actually, instead of scoring 25 goals in the first half of the season and none in the second half, this season he's been all round a better player, and also came up with big goals at big points for us, which has been great to see, because in his first couple of seasons under Gerrard, you could potentially say outside of Europe, in the league games, he wasn't always scoring against Celtic and he wasn't getting the last minute winners, but he's done that time and again this season. So I mean, we may have picked our well, you haven't quite yet, but maybe you can now. But I've gone for Goldson, Stewart's gone for McGregor. You'll pick now, but I mean, there's so many others that deserve a mention.
Yeah, if I have to pick now, I'll take Tavernier. I just think he's led the club magnificently. But if we're on honourable mentions, firstly off the park, I'd give a congratulations to Brandon Barker's barber for convincing us that boy still has hair. I think that the players that you've mentioned there, the Ryan Kent, Glenn Kamara, Barisic, and Alfredo, have been consistent. Well, they're good. They've had good seasons, undoubtedly. The reason that they're not with the first four that we've mentioned are that they haven't been consistent enough, perhaps. I mean, that happens with wingers in particular. I mean, you could possibly mention Yanis Hadji as an honourable mention as well. Maybe he's a little bit more extreme in terms of his inconsistency. But, with a Ryan Kent, we know that he's not going to give us a 9 out of 10 every single game, because that's not the game of a tricksy winger. Certainly not one that's going to get footed up and down the park every week. So Ryan Kent, I thought, against Celtic a couple of weeks ago, was fantastic. I thought he was, clearly the danger man. I thought against I've completely forgotten, against Slavia Prague, I thought he was excellent and was clearly targeted as the one that they needed to nullify, and they did that one way or another. He's had a very, very good season, and it's just maybe the lack of consistency, drifting in and out of games sometimes that means he's not being spoken of as a potential player of the season. Alfredo, we know about Alfredo. He goes through purple patches and then more lean periods, but he scored some incredibly important goals. I mean, even just the goal last weekend against Celtic to equalise there and preserve the unbeaten record. It's the season's done, so it's in a way it's meaningless, but it still felt like an incredibly important goal. And again, I'm pleased to see, because he's consistently scored 15 goals plus every season that he's been with us. His attitude's been superb this year. We all know that he wants his move. It's never a surprise when the media does an article about talking how he wants to go to England. Everyone knows that. So, again, we've got a lot from him. Glenn Kamara is either excellent or makes silly mistakes, I think. Thankfully, more excellent than mistakes. But again, very, very good season. The one player we've not mentioned is Philip Hollander. And I think Philip Hollander has been a phenomenal find for us. Still not lost a league game for Rangers. I can't think of any major howlers from him either that have cost us. I think he's not always had it his own way. He's had to be a little bit more patient than maybe he thought he would have had to be. And that's probably because we've also had good defenders along the way in the last 2 years, whether that's Katic, Evans and Balogun. We've had good centre-halves pushing him for a starting spot, but I think Hollander's probably nailed that down now. Again, top international player who's had a very, very good season. So I think in any other year, those players, your Kent, Kamara, Barisic, Hollander, Alfie, they'd all be in that consideration for player of the season. It's just that we're unbeaten. We've only conceded 9 goals. Everyone's been consistently excellent. Yeah,
I mean, it's good that we've all came to a consensus there, and we've got.
I'll give you one honourable mention who probably is off the radar, and that would be Jermaine Defoe, because I think the influence that he has in the dressing room, especially with some of the younger players, and showing the desire that he has to still compete at his age, but also what rubs off on other players by him telling them this is what you're going for, this is your aim, this is your target, this is where the glory is. Even just talking to them, be it at training or in the dressing room or when they're having their lunch or whatever it is, I think if you listen to one or two people talking about his input, absolutely invaluable. It might actually be the same as what we were talking about with McGregor and Davis, but done in a different way. That he's a guy who's been through the course, has played at the very, very highest level, as a league player at international level as well. And I think that a great many have learned from what he has done.
Well, that is just magnificent from you, this, Stuart. You've teed me up perfectly to bring in our partners' football prizes. There's still 40 tickets left to win a framed and signed Jermaine Defoe shirt. So for full details on that, you can check Frankie's social media or visit www.footballprizes.co.uk. Fantastic prize and more to come in the weeks ahead. Guys, we've sort of looked at player of the season. We've all picked someone different. But I suppose that's the absurdity of how many players are actually in the hunt. So the other thing I want to touch on tonight, and we'll finish off with this, there was a fantastic article by Rick Roberts on the Gersnet website regarding the games of the season, the games that shaped the season and the success that we've enjoyed. Now I've put together a list, but I think most of these were in his list as well. But these are sort of games that I felt shaped the league season for us. And I think the first game of the season, and we'll go through these one by one. But Ross, I'll start with you. And we look at big games and games that have helped us win the league, helped us, build momentum. And I think for me, the 1-0 victory over Aberdeen on the 1st of August was absolutely massive for us. And I think the way that we went up there and dominated, it could have been more than one, but they never had a sniff in the game. And I think that got the ball rolling. Yeah,
always satisfying to win up there. Not that they are our rivals, but it's just a potentially tricky tie we've not always had it our own way up there. So to go there and win first day of the season, given that I think you would be forgiven if there had been a kind of a wee hangover of disappointment from the way that the previous campaign had ended. So, yeah, I think that was a really, really important game. Sets the tempo. And Ryan 1-0, Ryan Kent goal. Alfie slips him through. He still has 40, 50 yards to run. Slots it past the keeper, nice and easy. You're right. It was never really a 1-0 game, was it? We were never troubled by them at all. So, I think that was a very important game. Are you looking for me to give my own suggestion, or just back up and say that?
I'm not interested in your suggestion.
I would say that game was a real double-edged sword, because it set the tempo and set the mindset for Rangers this season, and I would say it also set Aberdeen's season off and running in a completely different direction, one that they didn't want. Because Rangers, in the past, they've managed to get results against Rangers by, hook or by crook. They put in a performance from nowhere sometimes. On that particular day, Rangers went up there, Rangers dominated, Rangers got the result, and Aberdeen never were in the hunt again after that first game. And I don't care what anybody says, that first game virtually ended their season before it even began.
Yeah, and talking about ending seasons and causing uproar, the Celtic 0, Rangers 2, Parkhead in October. Stewart, that was, I think the biggest things that came out of that game for me was, Shane Duffy and his sort of performance, the pictures of Goldson celebrating, the way the goals went in, the way we just played them off the park really without even getting out second gear. That was a proper marker, and I think you saw in the weeks that followed how big a period that was from October to December. That won us the league, in my opinion.
That was the effect. That was in a heavyweight fight. You cannot understand how the other guy isn't performing, because what you haven't seen is the body punch that one guy has actually whacked him with and taken all the wind out of their sails. Because suddenly Celtic are in that position where Rangers, and you're bang on, Rangers played them off the pitch. But the other thing it put an absolute, searchlight on was the deficiencies in that Celtic team. And there was no way at that point in the season, again, by fair mean or foul, Celtic managed to get their first Old Firm game of the season after 10 matches, almost unheard of. So it was, what's the chances of that happening? Well, probably pretty good if you've got the ear of somebody at the SPFL. But the fact of the matter was, they played that game when they should have been at their peak after 10 games, and they were absolutely rattled. And I think that, again, as I go back to that Aberdeen game, I'll go back to that Celtic game, and I think you're absolutely right for putting it in there, David. Celtic never recovered from that, because all of a sudden Rangers didn't just look a good team, they looked a team that Celtic weren't even on a par with. And that psychologically, that 2-0 victory, if Rangers had won that 6-0, I don't think it would have any more effect on Celtic this season than how they managed to lose 2-0, because it was a bad 2-0 defeat.
Yeah, Ross, the next one that I've listed, and this for me was the biggest win of our season, I think, in December against Motherwell, 3-1 at Ibrox. It came off the back of a really, really disappointing night in St Mirren and Paisley against them in the cup. And I was actually on the show the Sunday following that 3-1 game, and my point that night was, it was no surprise to me that the players that scored that day were two new signings in Roof and Itten. I think Roof took the game to the scruff of the neck, when I think the players that had been there last season, which was the majority of that starting lineup, would have been thinking, oh shit, here we go again. And I think if we'd dropped points that day, that could have been a bit of a sticky wicket we would have found ourselves in.
Sticky wicket. No, you're right, because I think So that was the 19th of December. I've just got the match report up in front of me here.
You still Googling everything?
No, it's multitasking. Can you tell when my eyes go that way? I'm sort of typing away on something. That was the time when we were all sort of thinking we were probably about 9 points ahead of Celtic or something like that, but they might have had a game in hand or two. So we had a little points gap, but they were starting to rack up games in hand. And I think that was around about the time that we all sort of went, well, if we can get to the end of this stretch of games, so we can get to the end of the year, then it was the end of January unbeaten, we could do this. So it was when we really started to think of this being a possibility of 55 coming this year. And I know the St Mirren game was depressing, and that was, I think, mainly down to team selection and complacency. So to then come off the back of that, they scored after 6 minutes. It was that ball across the face to Callum Lang. It started getting really, really nervy because it almost had hallmarks of where we've been before. Strong start to the season, bit of a knock to the confidence, and it all falls away. And you're right, it's no surprise really that the 3 goals scored. The 3 goals came from 2 players who have not gone through that heartbreak at Rangers before. Cedric Itten, we've not actually spoken about Cedric Itten a huge amount over the course of this season on this show.
Unsung hero.
He's played a massive role for us. I mean, that goal put us 2-1 up. He's done the same again when he equalised against Motherwell a couple of months later. Scored for us. It was away at Lech Poznan, I think, in the Europa. He scored some important goals. Scored a wonderful goal. I remember his first goal against Motherwell in the first game. That sort of half volley that he took. Good player with a good future, I think, at Rangers. Had it not been for Roof and Morelos being in good form, I think you can feel a little bit hard done by. But that was a big game for us to show. I don't like saying the word because it's a wee bit cliched, but character. That was when we started to see character, and that's when the Gersnet podcast, we started talking a lot about if this was 12 months ago, we lost that game. Has there been a change in mentality? And that's probably one of the things that's got us over the line this year is the change in mentality. And that game, I think you're absolutely right, was very, very important to show that.
It put me in mind of a game going back to 92 when Rangers played Aberdeen and Roy Aitken scored for Aberdeen and Rangers were 1-0 down at half time. The game when Andy Gorham famously said about Nigel Spackman in the dressing room, and Rangers came out to centre half scored 3 goals. Now Aberdeen were Rangers' biggest rivals that particular season, and they put down a marker with the response. And whilst Motherwell were not Rangers' biggest rivals, I think the net effect was the same. They put down a marker as to how they would respond to adversity, because I don't think there was a player in that Rangers team, and probably an individual within their coaching or management setup who didn't realise that they got it monumentally wrong at St Mirren, and they had to make amends, and they've made amends by absolutely wiping the floor with everybody else in the league.
Yeah, and sure, we'd look at, again, big games, and it was only a few weeks after that Motherwell game, the Celtic game at Ibrox, and we all went into that thinking if we win today, we're in a really, really good position. And then the start of that game was such that we were all left at half time thinking, Jesus, thank God it's still 0-0. And you picked Allan McGregor as your player of the year, and arguably that was his best game of the season. That save from Griffiths, if that had gone in, who knows what could have happened that day. But again, as Ross says, character was shown that day. Yeah,
I mean, there's a bit of metal, there's a bit of backbone to this team. And another thing is that when if you go back to the last couple of seasons, sometimes when things have gone badly for Rangers, their chest has been used to rest their chin upon. Their heads have gone down and they've looked like a beaten team. Whereas this season, they have pumped the chest up. They've looked like guys who have kept their heads up, watched what's happening, and played themselves back into matches. That Celtic game as well was one where you were beginning to hear how many games that Celtic had in hand, or you were starting to calculate that, and people were still calculating that as if Celtic were going to win. if you take that forward into January, sort of time, and into February even, Celtic had 4 games in hand. That's 12 points. Without actually realising that Celtic team had never looked at any point in time if they could win 4 consecutive matches against anybody. And I think the other thing was winning 1-0 at home. Okay, there's no crowd there, there's nobody in attendance, but you have won on your own patch, and Celtic having got a sniff only a couple of seasons after they were scoring goals for fun against a Rangers team. And I think that as well was, you can come here and the end result is just going to be the same as what it was at your place. We're going to beat you because that's how good we are. And the effect of that on any opposition, it must really have been playing on the minds of Celtic players, because at that point they would be then looking and saying, well, if we're not doing it, are we still going to have a job? Are they going to go out and sign guys in January? And it transpired it wouldn't have mattered who they brought in January either. That's how dominant Rangers were by that time, and a really significant game and a really significant result.
Yeah, and Ross, I mean, even after that game at Ibrox in January, I still hadn't accepted that we were going to win the league at that point. And then we get to the end of January, we picked up a few results, only I think dropped 2 points in that run of really, really difficult games. Still hadn't accepted it. And then the only time that I sort of relaxed a bit was after they lost to Ross County. We scored in the last minute against Livingston. And then that's the Mirren game, and I remember texting you during that game in the early stages, and I think we'll just kind of trying to be who could be the most bitter, sarcastic bastard as usual, but during that conversation. But you did say at the start of that game, and I remember that we were on it today, and that was just, that performance that day was unbelievable. I mean, that was as dominant, and certainly I think it tailed off. Obviously, you can't keep up that pressure for 90 minutes, but that first 20 minutes was as good as I've seen us play, and probably under Gerrard, and we got the just rewards. And then it was sort of that felt like the big moment.
Yeah, that was the time that it wasn't over the line, because Celtic still had to go and play Dundee United. But that was the point that it was done. It was absolutely done. It didn't really matter what was coming next, whether they lose, they don't beat Dundee United as it actually transpired, or if we go to Parkhead and lose. It will happen at some point because of that result, because Celtic will drop points, because as Stewart said, there was no way they could piece together a winning run. That was a particularly enjoyable sort of 30, 45 minutes of football, I thought, because just the whole pressure and the stress of the last 10 years just lifted. One of my favourite goals of the season as well was the Morelos goal, where he's kind of running away from goal, cuts it back, and there's no power on that shot. He just puts it in the one place that Jack Annick can't reach it. So that was a particularly enjoyable 45 minutes of football. Didn't need to keep up the pressure on them after that, because it was done. That was the game, I think, that the players then go and celebrate in the corner with the fans who had gathered outside. That whole day felt special. I mean, I remember people texting me with photos outside Ibrox from 10 o'clock in the morning. It was a 3 o'clock kickoff, and folk were gathered there. It was a special day. You could tell that something was happening. All the videos coming out after the game as well, of the inside the changing rooms and people celebrating and enjoying it. It was that was a big day. That wasn't that. We were talking about significant games. That wasn't a significant game in terms of the outcome of the season, because it was already done before then. But in terms of the history of the club, that was a hugely significant game. And Gerrard said it after that press conference after that game. He said there will probably never be a more significant 3 points that I manage at Rangers. That was a huge game for our history.
Yeah, I mean,
the one word I would associate with that. The one word I would associate with that game would be belief, because you'd honestly believe that Rangers were going to take the title. I think everybody believed it was not mathematically done, but you just knew that those closest to you, namely Celtic, had absolutely nothing to come back with. And unless there was going to be kidnappings and your entire first team squad was going to go missing, there was no way you were not going to complete the season and win the title and within a very small window. It was there for the taking. In fact, it's probably already been taken. And I think that's why, as both of you have alluded to, it was a day when, you sound as if you took a bit of convincing there, David, that it was actually going to happen. In fact, you probably still wake up tomorrow and say, did it really happen? But I think the fact is that at that point in time, you knew that it was job done. Hence the reason why the players couldn't hold themselves in check, and neither could obviously the fans. But that was a day for me that you could believe that it was happening. And you're right, after a decade, and a torturous decade at times, there was just a real relief that, in terms of for Rangers players and Rangers fans, it was over with. Not a significant win by any means, but I think, and also maybe the manner, to sound like Walter Smith, the manner in which Rangers had performed that early on in that game was like, we're taking this by the scruff of the neck, we're going to win this game, and by God, we're going to enjoy the rest of the day.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a memorable season. I think it's been quite good actually tonight to take stock a wee bit and look at, some of the players that have made it such a special season, and the games that have been so important in the season as a whole. That's all we've got time for tonight. We've gone through all of that in a nicely shaped hour. If you enjoy what we're doing here, please subscribe to the podcast, like us on social media. Previous episodes, tonight's show, available to listen, all the usual platforms from Monday, Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, Castbox, and wherever else you get your podcasts. The show will return, I'm sure, with a preview show for next week's game against Cove Rangers, which could be a nice, tasty tie. And obviously the flagship back next Sunday too. So thank you for joining us tonight. Thanks to Stewart and Ross. And until next time, good night.